Welcome friends to another edition of TechSoup Connect Canada. And of course, we're also supported by TechSoup, a nonprofit that helps other nonprofits figure out technology. So today we're going to be talking about donor advised funds. And did you know that Canadian DAFs granted almost $1 billion to charities in 2021? And yet most nonprofits are still, frankly, a little perplexed about them. So in this webinar, we're going to learn why it's important to identify your donor advised fund donors in your database, because typically they come through anonymized. We're also going to talk about why this could be a really valuable source of fundraising for you and how you can make your organization more DAF attractive. Like basically, how do you polish yourself up so that you are ready for that date? With us today is Mike Todd, who has extensive experience in both wealth management and philanthropy. He likes to say he has worked on both Bay Street and Hastings Street. At Transform Philanthropy, Mike dedicates his efforts to helping donors, wealth advisors, and charities to optimize their giving, stewarding, and receiving of capital. He's an expert in donor advised funds, and he's committed to facilitating strategic giving. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Mike, who is going to give you a great introduction to this world. And so with that, over to you, Mike.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Eli, for having me on. Well, warning this afternoon, I am very passionate about this subject. And I have also had an extra coffee today. So I'm just putting that out there. Take it with a grain of salt. And today in particular, I am always learning something. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been hanging around donor advised funds for a long time. And I'm continually learning something new. And in particular, in the last couple of weeks, I've been doing a deep research dive into the data and trying to do some uncovering of what the size of the DAF market in Canada really is, because we're not exactly sure. We talk about maybe $10.5 billion or so. In the last couple of weeks, I've come up with some numbers that wouldn't pass the sniff test on anybody with a PhD in research, but I think we're probably closer to $14 billion in Canada. So that's good news if you're with a nonprofit, and I'll try to explain why as we go. But I'm excited to be here, and I'm just going to get rolling here. Okay, and we are going to move fast. Even before the coffee, we're going to move fast. A couple of things. My intention today is that everything we talk about is actionable. It won't just be talking about the world and the DAF and whether it's good or bad, but this will be actionable, I trust. And I do quote some American data. They are 20 size, roughly, the size of our market, but we trend in the same direction. So this is important. And now that we do have some Canadian data that's slowly compiling and coming up to the surface, my theory is looking pretty good. So we do trend in that same direction. So actionable items, yes, but I also want to convince people, if I need to, that this is important. Many charities that I speak to, they don't have a DAF strategy. They receive a few grants here and there, and that's great, but they don't have the DAF as a cornerstone of their fundraising strategy. And I'm here to try and change that. I need to spend a lot of my time convincing people. And so that's subtext to the practical items that we're going to talk about today. So let's start with a definition. And I know with the folks on the call, we probably have varying levels of knowledge about the donor advised fund. And this may be redundant to you, but I'd like to start from square one. It's a giving tool. Sometimes you see it referred to as a giving vehicle. And it's administered by a registered charity, usually a foundation, very often a public foundation, which will allow a donor to give today, receive the tax benefit today, and then provide recommendations on the granting of those funds to charities of their choice over time, whether that's next week, next month, next year, or I can spend the rest of my life actually spending the funds in my DAF. So that's what we're talking about. It's interesting. It's nebulous. And like I said, I've been diving into the data lately. It's not really a thing. It's just an approach where a foundation will take some assets and put them aside and saying, okay, we're not going to give those away as we see fit. We're going to allow the donor to speak to the destinations for that money. So it's quite interesting. And I'm convinced it's very, very important, and it's what we're going to talk about today. Now, I am a visual thinker. This graph, if you've seen me speak before, you will always see this graph, and we're going to see it several times in several variations today. But this really helps me think. And so this is what I just described it. Well, this is what it looks like. So we have the donation on the left side, The DAF itself is generally comprised of two different components. There's the investment part and then the giving part, or the cash part. So we donate cash, we donate assets. We may or may not rebalance those assets once they're donated, but we like to have the assets generally fully invested so that they continue to grow while we wait to give them away. When it comes time to issue a grant, we sell something, we raise cash, and then we send the money off to the charities of the donor's choice on the right side there. So this is a very important diagram. And as I said, we're going to see a couple of variations on it. This one, right off the bat, I want to try and get you to start thinking about this as two separate sections, as two halves. There's that donation that we've talked about already on the left. That's when the donor receives their tax receipt. It's a donation. On the right, technically this is a grant, and that's why you as a nonprofit should not issue tax receipts for donor advised fund grants that are received. That's probably one of the biggest mistakes I see charities making, is that they do send out tax receipts, and it probably just serves to confuse the donor who thought they already got there. So think about this in two separate halves. And I'm going to say not only are they separated by transaction, one being a donation, one being a grant, I want you to think about it now as well being separated in time. So I don't do everything at once, and that will become more important, I trust. Okay. I mentioned the registered charities that offer DAFs. Generally, we refer to them as DAF sponsors. And like I said, it's usually a foundation. And there are CRA says that there are at least 400 organizations in Canada that have at least one DAF. Now, 25% roughly have only the one DAF. And so I'm leaving them out off the list. They're not really in the business of offering donor advised funds. They have one for some reason, and I don't want to focus too much on those. So if we leave them out, we're talking about 275 to 300 donor advised funds that have multiple accounts. And very loosely, we can lump those into four buckets roughly. First would be the bank-affiliated DAFs, and you see the TD logo there. Aqueduct Foundation is part of Scotia. Over here, Gift Funds is it's an independent DAF, but it services almost exclusively RBC and BMO, and CIBC doesn't have their own DAF. Bucket number one is bank-affiliated donor advised funds. Number two would be wealth management firm affiliated DAFs, and you can see Raymond James there. You can see Nicola Wealth, they have their own DAFs. So they're generally offered exclusively to the clients of that wealth management firm. Bucket number three, I'm going to call the independents, or sometimes you hear them referred to as commercial DAFs. And that's the majority on this page. We got GiveWise, Makeway, Charitable Impact, My Charity Fund. So these are foundations that were created almost exclusively to offer donor advised funds, and they'll work with anyone, not just a particular firm or a particular bank. Now, some of them, a small number of them, we're talking about technology a little bit today, and this will be the extent of my technology speech. A few of these are what I would call platform DAFs or internet-based DAFs, but you would probably be surprised and disappointed at the number that are still paper-based, but nevertheless, that's the reality. So that's bucket number three. The last one I'll mention is community foundations. And I have Vancouver Foundation here just as a representative of that group. There are roughly 250 community foundations in Canada, and many of them, I'm not sure if it's half or a little less, would offer donor advised funds, or what we would consider donor advised funds, as part of their service offering for their donors. Generally four buckets. It's interesting to note this, so that if you receive a DAF grant and it's coming from Aqueduct, you know it's likely coming from somebody from Scotia, or at least a donor who has an investment account at Scotia. And that's useful information to have. But let's keep moving here. This slide I took out of a larger one, and usually I spend a lot of time on this one. I'm not going to. What I really want to touch on is the fact that there are multiple benefits to the donor to use a donor advised fund. And I think this is important because as nonprofits, it's helpful for us to understand why our donors would do this. Why aren't they just writing a check to me? Why are they doing this DAF thing? And it's helpful to understand that there are multiple benefits: efficiency, simplicity. Some DAFs will accept complex assets like real estate, like art, like private company shares, when some nonprofits cannot take those. And so it's useful to use the DAF as clearinghouse. I might be able to work with my own wealth advisor if I set up a DAF. And quite honestly, this point here about an alternative to private foundation is an interesting one. That's another whole conversation. But more and more, we're seeing people who have private foundations turn to a donor advised fund. And so the only thing I really want you to take away from this slide is it's very beneficial for donors to use a donor advised fund. And so we need to keep that in mind. Now, true confession, this slide used to say it's just a different form of payment. I changed that. So looking or thinking about what we just saw for donors, tons of benefits. For charities, think about it as first and foremost, a different form of payment. I gave you a grant last year and I took it out of my checkbook pocket. This year, I'm taking it out of my DAF pocket, but it's still me giving you the grant. But there's a bit of a twist, it being a form of payment. It's a different form. And so that's going to come through as we continue to talk here. But let me go back to get the slide. There we go. Let me go back to my diagram because I really want to focus a little bit on this and talk about why it's not the same as the donor writing you a check. Remember the two halves? We got 1 and 2. What I'm going to do is talk about this in the context of sharing a story with you. And that's about my favorite meeting ever. And this was a real meeting that took place probably 4 years ago now. And I'm going to the diagram back up as I share the story with you because it may make some sense if you can see it as I'm telling you what happened. I was working for a donor advised fund at the time, and we had to pull accounts with a particular wealth management firm here in Vancouver. And great relationship. They had relatively high net worth and ultra high net worth clients. We had a handful of very large donor advised funds with them. And like I said, we had a great relationship with the firm and by extension with their clients. And I got a call one day from the branch manager who said, I just been talking to Mrs. Smith's accountant. And Mrs. Smith is a trick name for one of the donors. And he said to me, the accountant doesn't get it. He does not understand what we're talking about here. Can you come over and explain it to him? And so he set up a meeting and I went and I brought along a philanthropic advisor from my company, from the donor advised fund. And that's somebody who works directly with donors and helping them if they need help in choosing the causes they're concerned about and the charities they want to support. Some folks come with those already in tow and some are not quite sure. So it's an extra level of service to offer philanthropic advisory. So I brought my colleague, the accountant was there, the advisor was there, obviously. Then the donor came. And we all sat down and I started to go through very similar to this, actually. I'm showing the diagrams and we're talking about it. And the accountant stopped me, he interrupted and said, okay, Mike, wait, stop talking. And that's not always easy for me to do because I love talking about this, but I stopped. And he said, okay, I think I understand. Let me repeat back to you what I believe you're telling me. And he said, okay, so every single year as the accountant, I go to Mrs. Smith and I say, listen, I've done a quick preliminary look at the taxes. And I need you to give me a tax receipt for, she was very high net worth. So let's say $250,000. Go get me a tax receipt for $250,000. And previously he'd never been really concerned or tried to help her with where to get that tax receipt from. He just needed it for the accounting. So he said, he points to the advisor now and he said, now your job will be to, with Mrs. Smith, and choose the best securities to donate into her DAF. We want to maximize our gains and the tax benefits. And then he pointed to my colleague, the philanthropic advisor. He said, now your job will be to help her achieve the most impact that she can from the grants that she's going to send out from this account. It was funny. And he looked at me, he said, I'm not quite sure why you're here, Mike, but anyway, that's fine. Let's just keep going. And it just clicked. It clicked for him and it clicked for me exactly what this thing is. And hopefully you can sense from that conversation the dual nature of this thing. On this side, the number one side, sometimes I have a little image of a human brain here instead of the number one. And we talk about this being the smart side, the intellectual side. Let's choose the best time to donate into my DAF. Let's choose the best securities to donate into my DAF. So that's very much a financial transaction. But if we do that appropriately, And ideally, then I, the donor, are going to end up with more money to give away. That's the smart side. And then over here is the heart side, where Mrs. Smith can now really think about what she wants to do with these funds. Her cause in particular was animal welfare. She was doing some amazing work. And that's really giving from the heart, because we know that the donors give from their heart. They're not focused on the smart side, but that's where the advisors can come into play. So really two separate things. And it's not just a tax planning vehicle, number one, and it's not just a granting tool, number two. But when you put those two things together, it becomes more than the sum of their parts. It's something incredibly powerful. And that's the point I'm going to try to get across to you today. And again, this is going to be a little jumpy because I'm not giving you the usual long drawn out dog and pony show. I want to focus on the things that are important to you as nonprofits and, as I said earlier, actionable ultimately. Okay, but first thing first, we want to identify and connect with DAF donors, either people who are already supporting us, and we may not be aware of the fact that they have a DAF, or we may not be aware of how it really worked in the past, so we were never quite sure this check was. But sometimes these, and Eli said this at the front, sometimes these grants show up and they appear to be anonymous. And that's frustrating. I totally get it. And there's an interesting conversation. Every conference I go to, I see a variation on this conversation where fundraisers are saying every single DAF grant we receive is anonymous. And what are we supposed to do with that? And then the DAF people in the crowd say, nope, less than 5% of DAF grants we issue are actually anonymous. That's a benefit of the DAF, but not many people do it. Well, every DAF versus less than 5% of DAFs. How is that? Well, I'll give you a hint. It depends on who gets to define anonymity. Here's the truth. It's true. Less than 5% of DAF grants are intended to be absolutely anonymous. However, there are three ways that generally the DAF grants are issued. One is with full donor contact information attached. One would be anonymous, and those are very few. That's true. But there's a soft middle where it goes in fund name only. And that's important because every DAF holder can, if they wish, can name their DAF. I could call it the Mike Todd Family Fund. So a lot of DAF grants go in fund name only. And so if you get a DAF and it says, oh, the Mike Todd Family Fund, I'm not really sure who that is, but there's a name there. Let me research that name. Let me see if anybody named Mike Todd has given to us in the past. It's possible that you'll be able to identify me in that. But if I called it the Sunny Day Fund, then that information from the charity's perspective is basically anonymous. And I think that's where this disconnect comes between the two parties. So quite honestly, if you hear a DAF person, and I'm a former DAF person, I love DAFs. If you hear somebody say less than 5% of DAF grants are issued anonymously, you can pipe up and say, listen, yeah, but how many go in fund name only? And that doesn't help us very often. So that's one way to defend that. But the key to all this, the way to get around this really, is to make sure that you get your existing donors or your prospects who have donor advised funds to self-identify. And that's really critical. You want them to put up their hand and say, yeah, I've got a DAF. And from their perspective, they're just thinking about how they're going to give you your grant. So you want them to stand up and say, I have a DAF, and then you can change your approach and be a little more specific. So that's the key. Let's not get too bogged down in whether it's anonymous or not anonymous, but let's get folks to self-identify and we get ahead of this conversation. So remembering that the DAF is not just also a form of payment, the first solution is ask everybody. Ask your donors, ask your prospects, and use the words donor advised fund everywhere. And this sounds silly. I'll tell you why it's not in a minute. If I look at your website and you have a ways to give page, which is obviously the name that a lot of people use on their donate page on their website, if it says ways to give, and I don't see the words donor advised fund on your ways to give page, it's quite likely that I may assume that my DAF is not a way to give to your organization. And that sounds silly, like I said, but I have had many conversations, more than a handful, with donors who have said that exact thing to me. We talk about their DAF and they love it and it's so easy, it's so efficient. But of course, I still have to check or use my credit card for charity ABC. And I've learned now, but initially I would look at them and say, well, what do you mean you have a DAF? Why are you issuing checks? I don't think they take DAF money. And then I would say, what makes you think that? I don't see the words anywhere. I know the fundraiser very well. We have a longstanding great relationship. She's never uttered the words donor advice fund. I read every word that they send me. I read every word on the website. I've never seen the words donor advice fund. I don't think they take that money. And so just a little extra friction in that relationship that you don't want, quite honestly. So get everybody to identify as a donor advised fund holder first. And then you can also work at, and Eli used the term I love to use, becoming more DAF attractive and drawing more people to you. Okay, this is absolutely critical now. So if you receive a DAF grant that appears to be anonymous, remember what we talked about there. But if it appears to be anonymous, you still want to acknowledge and thank the donor. And you might say, how the heck do we do that if it looks like it's anonymous? Well, if you know my name, hey, but you address this to, if you don't have my email address, you don't have my home, address this to the DAF sponsor, or send it to the DAF sponsor. Excuse me, the words are important here. Send it to the DAF sponsor, address it to me. So you know it's Mike Todd and that's all the information you have. Dear Mike, thank you very much, et cetera, and send it to the DAF sponsor. Or if it's the Happy Day Fund, Dear Happy Day Fund, use what you have. Thank you very much, et cetera, and send it to the DAF sponsor. You could even send it, Dear Donor, even if you don't know, just Dear Donor, send it to the DAF sponsor. Never say, Dear Charitable Impact, Dear GiveWise Foundation. Never do that, because the DAF sponsors will just chuck that in the circular file or the delete button. Address it to the donor, given the information that you have, send it to the DAF sponsor, and they will all tell you that they do their very best to forward that information to their donors. They're not trying to stop you from reaching them. They're just trying to honor the donor's possible request for a little bit of distance. So whatever information you have, thank that person, thank that name, thank that donor, and send it off to the DAF sponsor. But the key again is finding out from your donors and prospects who has a DAF, and then the whole nature of this grant changes. You're not surprised by it. You know it's coming. You happen to know I'm Mike Todd and I'm going to give you a grant. And oh, by the way, it's coming from my DAF, and you look for it. That changes everything. It becomes much smoother when it happens that way. Okay. All right, Mike, but it sounds like a lot of work. Is it worth it? And unequivocally, I say, yes, it is. You would expect me to say that, but I truly believe that. Let's delve into that a little bit. Okay, let me set the stage for the next bit that I want to raise in this. Why is it worth it? Let me tell you, I believe that fundraisers have the most challenging job in the world. I'm not just blowing smoke. I honestly believe that. I know I couldn't do it. I love what I do, but I could not do that. You have the most challenging job in the world, and you have at hand two tasks. As I say, I'm grossly oversimplifying, but I think this actually helps illustrate something. Task number one is you're trying to get me to part with some of my money. Sounds crass, but that's task number one. If I'm going to give you a grant, the first thing I need to do is decide that I'm going to give away some of my wealth. And that's not always a comfortable conversation. That can be a little bit challenging. Task number two is a little happier. You want me to give that money that I've decided to part with to your organization. That's a lot of fun. That's getting to talk about your mission and your values, and is it in alignment with what I believe? That's a very positive conversation. So task one, challenging. Task two is a lot of fun and more engaging and interesting. So keep those two tasks in mind as we move forward here. A couple of benefits now for the charity. I'm going to keep talking about this. Benefit number one, listen, it's the fastest growing way to give in Canada, plain and simple. Now, it's starting from a very low number. So it's quite possible that it can be the fastest growing, and yet most people are not quite sure what it is and not familiar with it yet. But that is changing rapidly. Simply put, this is where the donors are going. And so you have to meet them there. And so the luxury of saying, oh, DAFs are important and we're not going to worry about it, I think that's going to become increasingly problematic as it continues to grow. So it's the fastest growing, and that seems to be growing exponentially. Okay, my benefit number two And this is interesting. And this is quite honestly, if you remember back when I said, I used to say the DAF is just a different form of payment. And now I say it's not just a different form of payment. Part of that reason is that when people switch, when your existing donors switch, and this research comes from the US, yes, but I firmly believe anecdotally that we trend in the same direction. And I've heard these stories in Canada. Once somebody switches to a DAF, their annual giving generally doubles. On average, some people more, some people less, but their giving goes up just by switching the way that they're paying this grant, if you will. It's a different form of payment. It's a form of payment that people tend to be more generous with. It's like magic. And I remember reading this, kind of being perplexed by it and thinking, why is this happening? I think I figured it out. And we'll make this obvious as we move forward. But why is this magic happening? This is worth keeping in mind. And let me explain it to you this way. If you were going to go to Indigo and buy a book, which card would you rather use to pay for the book? Got my Visa card and I have my Indigo gift card. Well, and this is going to sound a little silly, but it's actually extremely relevant. A donor advised fund is like a gift card for grants to charity. I can give you a grant today from my donor advised fund without reaching for my wallet and without my net worth or my bank account dropping by 1 penny. It's crazy. Think about that for a minute and just let that sink in. I can give you a grant and it doesn't cost me anything in theory, because remember the diagram before when I asked you to separate the DAFs in time. I funded my DAF last week, last month, last year. I put money and assets into my DAF, not when you asked for a grant, but when I needed the tax receipt for my finances. And I knew that I was going to give away that money over time anyway. So that debit to my net worth, if you will, when I funded my DAF, I've forgotten about it. It's gone. The pain is gone. It's now forgotten. So effectively, my grant to you today from my donor advised fund doesn't cost me anything in real time terms, if that makes sense, because I parted with those assets some time ago. And I really want that to sink in. Let me know if you're not sure what I'm saying there, because this is really, really key. And it sounds silly and it sounds a bit ridiculous, but I really want you to think about this. The gift card versus the credit card and how much fun it is, especially if you find a gift card under the bed or something. It's like free money. I put my money into my DAF some time ago. It's like having a gift card for charity. Now, this is interesting. Pension from people who give from a DAF is generally higher than non-DAF donors. And how does that make sense? It's really perplexing. I think it's connected to what we just talked about. And I also think that it's connected to what I'm about to talk about. But let me go back to my diagram for a minute. Okay, so remember the two sides. Remember we talked about these two events being separated by transaction type and also in time. And let me stretch you a little bit here. These two parts of the DAF process represent the two tasks that I mentioned earlier. Remember one had the frowny face and one had the happy face? Well, these two halves of the DAF represent those two transactions. The left side, which is the donation, is task number one. I need to give up some of what I have. Okay. The right side, the grant, this is task number two. You would like me to support your organization with some of the money that I've already given up. Well, not only are these separated by transaction and separated in time, but let me suggest now that they're also separated by responsibility. And let me explain what I mean by that. Remember, I said task one can be uncomfortable, talking about giving away some of my wealth. Over here, when I'm a DAF donor, I have that task number one conversation, not with you, the fundraiser, but with my wealth advisor. And she's doing it in the context of helping me. So you're off the hook of that uncomfortable, frowny face conversation. It's already happened. I've already had that, and I had it with somebody else who sees it as their job, quite frankly, to help me in that way. And now you and I can have the grant conversation over here on side number two. And this is happy face, the smiley face. This is the enjoyable conversation where we talk about your mission and my values and how there's some alignment there. This is why the DAF is so important to your fundraising strategy. It can't be overstated. And quite honestly, I haven't heard it talked about in this way before. There's the idea that I can give you grants and it doesn't cost me, quote unquote, anything because I gave it away a long time ago. And then there's the context of I'm removing that conversation. And obviously it's not an explicit conversation that you have with donors. Hey, you need to give away some money. But it's embedded in the ask is them having to part with some wealth. Well, if you remove that from the conversation, you're left with the fun part of that. So let's move on here to reason number 4.
So pretty much what you're saying, the accountant and the advisor are on the first stage. So the accountant's the one selling that you have to pay these taxes, might as well donate it to a charity or a donor advised fund. Advisor, is the advisor like a third party advisor, or is he an advisor for the donor advised fund?
Oh, good question. Thank you. Yeah, I should clear that up. The advisor in this context is the donor's wealth advisor. So their investment advisor.
Okay.
So the donor is the advisor's client, to use these words interchangeably.
Okay. Got it.
Does that make sense?
He's now saying, okay, you should sell these stocks or donate this amount.
Yes.
What do we do? So in a sense, you're saying, is he donating stock? What is he doing? So say, okay, you have $100,000 tax liability. You need a tax deduction.
Yeah.
So he calls his advisor, right? The advisor says, okay, do you want to sell stocks or do you want to give? Does the accountant say just pay the bill from your cash account, or the advisor?
No, good question.
Donate stocks. What are we doing?
Yeah, great question. First of all, in this context, we would not want to sell. What we want to do is donate securities in kind. In other words, donate the stocks themselves. And that way, if I sell the stocks and give the money to charity, I owe capital gains on the sale of those stocks. But if I donate them in kind, then the capital gain goes over to the charity with the stock. And because the charity doesn't pay taxes, then that goes away. So the point of that, and thank you for asking, because I should have been more clear with this. The point of that, the advisor's role, the wealth advisor's role, is to help the client maximize the potential gains. And we want to do that, one, by donating securities. So we get a tax receipt for the $100,000 in your example. But we want to donate the securities that have the highest capital gains that will ultimately be owed on those securities. So don't sell ABC, don't donate ABC, donate IBM or Meta or whatever you own. So the advisor gets to go through the portfolio and say, these are the particular positions that we should donate because we will maximize the capital gains exclusion. So it's two-pronged attack. You get the tax receipt and the accountant's happy because he gets his 100,000 tax receipt. But the donor also wants to make sure that they're getting rid of some of the capital gains that are sitting on these securities. So don't sell, donate in kind, and look for the securities that have the highest capital gain. And there's all sorts of other mitigating factors in your financial plan. So that's where the advisor can sit back and say, okay, we've got these issues, we've got these capital gains. Here's what I think we should do. The accountant wants 100,000. Here's 100,000, but I'll put together the stocks that we should be donating to really make sure we get the full benefit of that transaction.
Okay, got it. So
hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, that helps. And then now they pick the stock. Are they sending it to the donor advised fund?
Yes. Yeah, it's just a transfer of the position from my personal account to the account of ABC Charity. So
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So he transfers it to the donor advised fund, and now the donor advisor fund could either sell it or hold on to it.
Exactly. Absolutely. Okay. They could keep it, they could sell it and rebalance the portfolio, whatever they wish. And they can do that without worrying about any capital gains tax at all now.
Okay. So they could sell or keep. Yeah. Sell or hold.
Absolutely.
Sell or hold. And then from there, every year, the person could say, okay, I want to donate this much amount this year, or do they just grow it in the account? What do they do?
Yep, good question. That depends on the donor advice fund. Most will encourage the donors to give away something every year. Okay, do it as frequently as they want and as slowly as they want, given the restrictions that the DAF has. And that's where you would instruct the advisor who's now managing that account on behalf of Charity ABC. Okay, we should sell some of the stuff now because I want to send them a grant. So that just happens as necessary as the donor requests grants.
Okay, perfect. Okay, all right,
Great.
thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Thanks for the question. Okay, so the summary, the benefit number 4 is really a summary of everything we talked about, but this is really, really timely. And I'm just going to look at my watch. We have time here. This is important. It's a revelation that came to me one day when I was thinking about everything we've just gone through. And it's, you know what, times are tough. And quite honestly, I think we're either in a recession or we're heading to a recession. It's okay. I've got some money in my donor advised fund already. I'm retiring and my income will drop and I'm not sure if I'll be able to maintain this level of giving. It's okay. I've already got funds in my donor advised fund for the next number of years. On it goes. So if you're encountering donors or potential donors now who are saying, you know what, I think my job's at risk. I'm not sure I can afford to give anything away this year. That's a challenge. That's really challenging. And I'm hearing from lots of my fundraising friends, that's exactly what's happening. Donors are dwindling in number and the giving is dwindling as well. You want to find the people who are not impacted by that. And that's why this donor advice fund, I'm telling you, I've been doing this for so long and every day I figure out something out about it that it just amazes me. That's why this is so interesting and so important that it is part of your fundraising strategy, because it doesn't matter. In theory, nobody loves to be in a recession. You know, the rest of my life may be a little stressed because of it, but I don't have to worry about my giving because I funded my donor advised fund last year when it wasn't a problem. And now I have this money. It can only go to charity. I can't have it back. I wish I could because my bills are piling up, but I can't. It can only go to charity. And so it's recession proof, as I like to say. And I don't think that's a stretch. It sounds a bit silly, but I don't think it's a stretch. It's the idea that I've already got money in my donor advised fund and I don't need to necessarily worry about current events, whatever they may be, impacting my ability to support the charities that I want to support.
Is it hard to start a donor advised fund? Is it complex?
No, it's very simple. It's really simple if it's one of the tech-based ones, but even for the ones that are paper-based, it's quite simple. It's just you sign what's known as a gift agreement or a donor agreement with them, and then you're off to the races. They're all a little different, and they all may have different minimums and different requirements, but the general structure is what you saw in my favorite diagram. That's the way it works, and you can open one up quickly. A lot of the ones that are with wealth management firms, et cetera, they may have higher minimums, $10,000 or $25,000. A couple of the platform-based DAFs, because I've had this conversation with many people, and they've said to me, listen, this sounds so interesting. I'm not here yet. I don't have the income yet. I give away a couple $100 a year. I guess you can't help me. And what I do there is I actually point them to one of the platform-based donor advised funds. Say, go over here, go to givewise.ca or whatever it is, click on new account, give them your information, pull out your credit card, put $100 in, and then you have your own DAF now. There's no securities involved, but you have the ability to send that to the charities of your choice over time. So there really is a benefit to everyone, even if you're only giving away a couple $100 a year, all the way to, I've had my largest donor advice fund I ever worked on was $70 million. So it could be $70 or $70 million. It really doesn't matter. Okay, just in summaries. Okay. Not only is it a very valuable tax planning, side number 1 tool, and it's also a valuable charitable giving tool, side number 2. And again, I'll just repeat myself, but I'll just stress, keep in mind those two sides and being separated in time, because I do on occasion hear from fundraisers say, you know what, our donor just put money into their DAF and it should have come directly to us and you're just getting in the way. He may have put $100,000 into his DAF and then he's going to send you the 10 that you're expecting. That hasn't changed. That hasn't changed at all. But the best time for a donor to put money into their DAF is not when you're asking for a grant, but when they need the tax receipt. Keep that in mind. Those are two separate things. The other thing I should have pointed out about my favorite meeting is that's an annual conversation that accountant has. Every year, he looks at the taxes. He knows his client is giving away lots of money every year anyway. So every year he can revisit the DAF and say, okay, this year we need $200,000 tax receipt. This year we need $100,000. Oh, the year after, taxes are bad. This year we need $400,000. So it becomes this tool, but it happens in different times, the funding of the DAF and the issuing of the grants. So remember, not just another form of payment, because people tend to be more generous with it. And this is something I talk about when I work with charities, and we haven't gone down this road, and we won't. Time doesn't allow. But when charities become convinced about what I'm talking about, especially the part about donors giving more once they open a DAF, I do a lot of work with charities now where we go to their donors and we teach them about donor advised funds, even the ones who have never heard of a DAF. We want them to know now, and we want to encourage them to open a donor advised fund, frankly, because it's better for the donor. Remember the long list of benefits. But quite honestly, it's because we also know it's very likely that the donor's giving is going to go up once they get into this structure. So first and foremost, though, they're donors. So steward them as such, and that means figuring out who they are. I sometimes say there's no such thing as a DAF donor. There's just a donor who uses a DAF. It's kind of a play on word, and maybe it's a bit clunky, but don't think of them as being separate, other than the fact that they have this great tool that you now know how it works, other than the fact that they are likely going to be more generous with their DAF money than when they were writing checks. But really, it's still me, or it's still Mrs. Smith. And that's the key, is to figure out who is giving and then to steward them as such. Yeah, as I said, they can be more valuable. And let's just say it, if my giving doubles when I open a DAF, I become a more valuable donor. That's just the way it is. And yes, once you've identified DAF donors, you can definitely create DAF-specific asks and campaigns. And that's a whole other level of work where certain things about DAF donors, you know that they're not necessarily tied to giving season because they're not waiting on that tax receipt. They already got that last year when they put money into their DAF. I know charities, nonprofits, especially in the US, where they've been doing this longer, who have very focused campaigns that address donor advised fund donors. It's fascinating. The message I want to leave you today is it's really simple. We've talked about some interesting, intricate, I won't say complicated, but intricate transactions and reasons. But the thing I want to leave you with is very simple. And that is that a DAF strategy going forward is going to be key for your overall fundraising strategy. And that's what I spend my time doing. And some people look at me after all this and they go, we got 4 checks last year. It's really not that important. And I say, sure, you got 4 checks last year. You'll get 10 this year, and you're going to get 50 the year after because it's growing. So let's tackle this now while it's manageable and get a grip on it all, and then move forward with a reasonable and specific donor advised fund strategy. And I think that's it. Yeah. Thanks for listening. I know we jumped around a little bit, but I really wanted to take the important things. We could have talked about your CRM. How do you book in DAF grants? There's a specific way to do that. That's another subject. You can send me a note and ask me if you like. Many different things that we can talk about. But I think the one thing you can't do is ignore this.
We've got some good questions coming at us. Let's go through them real fast so we make sure that we have time. One coming from Kay, just as a clarification, which is, so as a charity, do we have to set up a DAF? Or is it just people that we can just find people with DAFs to grant money to you? Like, what side does the DAF need to live?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. Some charities, there's a small number of charities who have decided they want to start their own donor advised funds. I have an opinion on that. I don't think it's worth the trouble. So the key is to definitely identify people who have a DAF, either existing donors or people you're prospecting, and learn how to adapt to the reality of a growing donor advised fund marketplace when you're looking for grants.
Awesome. Next comes a question from Lee, who says, around terminology, do donors use the word DAF, or should we avoid that acronym and really use donor advised funds consistently?
That's a more interesting question than you might think. Yes, it's a great point. I encourage people to say, first of all, I say DAF because I talk a lot and it's quicker than saying donor advised fund. But I would use that term, donor advised fund. Do you have a donor advised fund? Do you know what a donor advised fund is? Now, to be perfectly frank, remember I said it's starting from a very low base, but it is the fastest growing. 9 times out of 10, people are going to look at you and go, what's a donor advised fund? And then you have an opportunity to explain it to them if you wish. But that 1 time out of 10, it's going to be gold because you're going to identify somebody who's already got one, and then you know how to move forward.
Great. Here's some questions coming in from Cindy. Are there restrictions around what types of charities you can donate to depending on like the tax deductions you've received? Are there any kind of restrictions about where money can go out of a DAF?
No, great question. As long as it is a legitimately and valid registered charity, according to CRA, then, and most DAFs will say, we don't care who you give to, we just care that you give. So any charity would be eligible. Occasionally you'll run into a donor advised fund that is cause specific. So we're an environmental DAF, so we prefer you give to the environmental charities. But otherwise, as long as it's a legitimate charity, and then there's a whole question of the non-qualified donees that we won't tackle today. But any charity is eligible.
And what about cross-border giving? Say you put your money into a Canadian DAF, but you're like, oh, actually, there's this US cause I want to contribute to.
Good question. Yeah, it's the bane of my existence. I would say that Canada is one of, quite frankly, we've a very generous charitable regulation set in Canada, except when it comes to cross-border giving. It's challenging. It's difficult. There are some DAFs around. A Myriad Canada is a great example, where they would take on the task of creating an agency agreement with a foreign charity and sending the money through that. So it's doable, but it's challenging, particularly in Canada. I'm hoping that that's going to change. And I see signs that it's starting to change, but that's a real challenge.
Great. Now I have two questions here about stocks. So the first question is, if you throw stock into a DAF, and so it's just sitting there, what happens to any appreciation? Is that subjected to a capital gains tax? Does that just go in row for the DAF amount? Like, how does that get treated?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. If I donate my securities, I donate to a foundation, the foundation holds them, and the stocks hopefully keep going up. That's one of the benefits of a DAF, is hopefully I can end up giving away more money than I actually donated. So that's a hint. So it grows. The charity that owns those stocks now, they're not mine any longer. They're owned by the charity. The charity is a tax-free entity. So we'll never pay tax on those.
So the DAF itself is a tax-free entity.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And the DAF will allow me, the donor, I watch my account and it just keeps going up and up, and I have more money to give away, which is fantastic. So no tax implications after the donation.
So that's the next question that comes in from Albert. So who basically administers that stock and picks the stocks once it's in its DAF mode?
Another good one. Again, depending on the donor advised fund, some of the truly independent ones will allow me to continue to work with my existing wealth advisor. So my advisor who manages my account, she's now going to manage my DAF account. Some DAFs do that. Some DAFs say, okay, thank you very much for donating these assets to us. We have our own advisor and they do really well, but don't worry about it. And it grows in that sense. So it really depends on the DAF. But so it's either your own or it's either the DAF's money manager looking after that.
But ultimately, basically, it's your money. You just can't take it out of the DAF then.
Yeah, it's CRA doesn't like the first part of the sentence you just said. It's not your money, it's the DAF's. But the DAFs they treat it as if it's still yours, but
you still have some administrative authority in some way over it.
Yes, you have advisory privileges, I think is the term we often use.
Do not come to me for legal advice, friends. Another question, what does a DAF typically charge for this administration? And is it billed all as it comes in or goes out? Like, how does that typically look like?
Good, yeah. And again, you're probably tired of hearing me say it depends. Generally, I would say two things. One, if I'm going to have an advisor, either mine or the DAFs, manage the account, there's an investment management fee of some sort. And that's between me and my advisor, or the DAF may say, listen, we have a big account with Genesis Talent and they charge us X%. And just FYI. And then the DAF itself will add a little administrative fee. And usually that's 0.5% to 1%. And often these fees are annual. Some of them charge quarterly, and they can come straight out of your DAF. So you're not having to pay the fee for the DAF or for the investment management out of your own pocket. It comes out of the tax receipted dollars. And the DAF takes care of that itself.
But because it's now in this place and the market goes really badly, your capital could depreciate. It could actually decrease while it's in the DAF.
Yes. Yeah. Capital could depreciate. And I often get asked what happens to the tax receipt. Nothing. So you got your $100,000 tax receipt. It's now worth $90,000. That's unfortunate. And you only have 90 to give away, not 100, but it doesn't impact the tax receipt.
Interesting. Cool. Two more questions here. Are DAFs we did like foundations in Canada, do they have to give away 5% per year? What are the rules around that?
That's great. Yeah. And keep in mind what I said, a DAF sponsor is nothing more than a charity, generally a foundation. So yes, as a foundation, they're responsible for giving away 5% a year. Now, the interesting thing is some DAFs will say, okay, every account, you have to give away 5% every year. It's easy, it's clean, and they don't have to worry about it. Other DAFs say, listen, some accounts give away 10, some accounts give away 50. So we more than meet the 5% requirement without forcing each account to make an annual disbursement. We want you to give that money away, but some DAFs will make you do it every year and some DAFs won't, but they are still held to the 5% rule. And generally, on average, I think these days, it's about a 20% disbursement rate from donor advised funds. So say it's not an issue. I think that might change in the future. I think regulators may force us to do per account. That's okay if that happens, but right now it's not the case.
We are at time, but I've got 2 more questions in the queue. George, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I have a question. Once when a person or company donates the money to DAF, now, do we have a say to what charitable organization we would like to donate the money?
Oh, great question. If by we, you mean the donor? Absolutely. It's the donor who says to the DAF, listen, this year I want you to send $10,000 to BC Children's. It's absolutely at the discretion of the donor, and it's their charities of choice. And the DAFs don't force you to give to any particular charity.
So another question, in portfolio, when a person has a portfolio, he donates the just stock or whatever to DAF, some of these could be a little bit negative in value. Do you accept those or you don't?
If you're saying it's gone down since you bought it,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. As long as there's some value to the security, then you'll receive the fair market value at the time of the donation for your tax receipt.
Thank you.
Great. Quick question here from Barry. What is the DAF growth rate? You looked a little bit about what it's looked like generally, but do you have a sense of what it's looking like right now in Canada?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. Good to see you there, Barry. I've been thinking a lot about that. I'm a big DAF fan. It's astounding. And it's across the board. A lot of them are growing at 10, 20, 30% per year right now, which is just through the roof. Now, that could be a small DAF. It could be a large DAF. It really depends on depends a little bit on the market, quite honestly. People tend to put more money into DAFs when they got a ton of capital gain sitting there. So that happens. It depends on the market as well. Once I donated, is it up or down, or that impacts the statistics? But they're growing rapidly, and it's definitely the fastest growing. And I'm comfortable saying on average, generally, I'm seeing numbers as far as growth in assets of DAFs of 20% plus the last couple of years. It's just, that's why these things have been around for 70 years, but they were a secret for a long time. And now all of a sudden they're going like this. And as I said earlier, it does seem to be exponential.
Right. A question coming in from Lisa.
Hi, I can share it live. Also, thank you for this talk. It's been really interesting. And for this time, my question is a little bit obscure. I'm not going to go into the admin database side of it, which is always a bit of a mess and a challenge, especially with bases as they are. But the question, and part of the reason that our organization at least hasn't expanded fully and gone to everybody, do you have a DAF? Do you have a DAF, donor advised fund? Is because a lot of staff don't understand it. And so it's this continuous training, and then it's a continual retraining because there's always turnover. So if you're asking the question, do you have a DAF? You want the staff asking it to have the answer. If it's on the website, you want the people equipped on the phone line to be able to have it. Do you think that needs to be in place first, or is it a missed opportunity? Should it just be like, just make it as good as possible and then go? Or should it be, let's have that groundwork so that we really engage the donors who do come forward?
Wow, Lisa, that's a great question. I hadn't thought about it in those terms before. I do have an answer. I think as long as you have a rudimentary sense of what you're talking about, I think you should start asking people, and you can both learn as you go. And then when you start to realize, hey, we've got a few people here who have donor advised funds, we never knew it. We really better get on top of this. Well, selfishly, that's what I do. I can come in and help build processes so that you only have to do it once. So you don't have to hire me long-term, just once. So we build the processes so it becomes just as easy as credit cards, just as easy as check. Everybody knows their role, etc. But you're right. It's like I just said a minute ago. I refer to the DAF, the newest old product out there, or the oldest new product. Take it any way you want. So there's definitely a learning curve. And the added challenge I'll throw out there is the donors seem to be learning about DAFs faster than charities do. And that's why you need to take advantage of it. But yeah, I would say don't wait to start. Just as if somebody says, yeah, I do have a donor advice fund. Why are you asking? Oh, I understand it's really beneficial for you. It's efficient. A lot of donors I speak to think it's a lot of fun. And I'm just curious. And have you considered giving to us through your DAF? Or do you give through your DAF? Maybe we don't even know it's you at this point. So I would ask, don't wait to ask, but then get a plan in place.
I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thanks, Lisa.
Fabulous. And I have a final question that came in from Kay, which I think is a great place for us to end, which is to say, as a charity who's never had a DAF grant, we start. Like, what's the first thing we should do?
I'm a big believer. I have a personal motto of fake it till you make it. So you never had a DAF grant? It doesn't matter. I still want to see the words donor advice fund all over your website. I want to see it all over your collateral. Here's an idea. Why isn't there a checkbox on your mail-in that says, please contact me. I prefer to give through my DAF. I mean, that's gold. You're getting somebody to stand and self-identify. So don't wait. And the fact that you've never received a DAF grant, don't wait. Just socialize the words, because there are people out there who have DAFs who are looking for the words and they're not finding them and they're moving on to the next website. Definitely don't wait, and don't let the fact that you've never had one slow you down.
Lovely. That's really great advice. Thank you.